The wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the sharp chill of early winter. Snow had begun to settle in soft, powdery drifts along the horizon, and the cabin that Luke called home stood isolated, a lone refuge in the vast expanse of white. Luke had spent decades carving a life from this rugged land, raising cattle, fixing fences, and battling storms that could wipe out days of labor in a single night. He had always preferred solitude, the kind that gave a man space to think and breathe. But on this day, that solitude was about to be interrupted in a way he had never imagined. A faint, hesitant sound caught his attention as he returned from tending the northern fence. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then a small figure appeared in the doorway, a young woman, clutching a bundle of belongings tightly against her chest. Her coat was thin against the cold, and snowflakes clung to the dark strands of her hair. She looked around nervously, her wide eyes scanning the cabin's interior, as if she weren't sure she had any right to be there at all. Luke's hand instinctively went to the worn wooden frame of the door. "Hold it right there," he said, his voice calm but firm. The muscles in his jaw tightened, the years of self-reliance and caution sharpening his instincts. He wasn't used to strangers wandering into his life, and yet, as he looked at her, something tugged at him, a mix of curiosity, protectiveness, and a strange, unnameable pull. I need shelter," she said softly, stepping forward just a fraction. Her voice carried a mix of fear and courage, as though she had walked a long, lonely road just to reach this doorstep. "Please, I don't have anywhere else to go." Luke studied her carefully. She seemed fragile, yes, but there was a resilience in her posture, a quiet determination beneath the obvious vulnerability. He could see she had faced hardship, though her soft gaze hinted at untold stories. Normally, he would have turned her away, but something in her presence stirred a protective instinct he had long forgotten he possessed. "You can't just walk in here," he said, his tone measured but steady. "This is my home. Nobody comes in uninvited." Her lips pressed together in a thin line, and for a moment, she looked like she might turn and walk away, but the cold, the snow, and the desperation in her heart anchored her in place. I have nowhere else," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't know where else to go. Please." Luke didn't move aside immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, one hand resting on the doorframe, his piercing eyes locking onto hers. "Then you stay," he said finally, his voice firm but carrying an undercurrent of something softer, something protective. "But not because you begged. You stay because I say so. This isn't a question, and it isn't temporary. I don't make exceptions lightly." Her eyes widened, and she swallowed hard. There was a flicker of relief, but also hesitation, an understanding that she had stumbled into something far bigger than just a warm cabin. Luke's presence, imposing and yet steady, was both intimidating and reassuring. She could feel his gaze scanning her, noting every trembling motion, every small sign of discomfort, and instead of feeling threatened, she felt safe. He stepped aside, finally, allowing her to enter, but his posture remained protective, as though the doorway itself were a barrier he would not let anyone cross lightly. "Step inside," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet strangely gentle. "You're not a guest. You're not here by chance. If you're staying on my terms." "Understood." Emma nodded, clutching her bundle tighter for reassurance, and crossed the threshold into the warm, dimly lit cabin. The scent of pine smoke and wood polish wrapped around her, creating a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in months. She glanced at Luke, who still stood near the door, his eyes scanning her face, taking in her every hesitation and every hint of courage. "You'll be safe here," he said quietly. "For now, this cabin is yours as much as it is mine. But you stay with your eyes open, understood?" She nodded again, and for the first time since leaving her life behind, she allowed herself a small breath of relief. The door had closed behind her, but the space it created, between fear and safety, uncertainty and trust, was just beginning to form. Luke's gaze softened slightly, though his posture remained alert. He hadn't expected this. He never expected to feel anything for someone who stumbled into his life uninvited, but the seed had been planted. And in the quiet, flickering glow of the cabin, the first moments of an unexpected bond were taking root, one that would challenge both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. The snow continued to fall outside, covering the plains in white, and inside, the warmth of the cabin and the presence of each other promised a beginning neither of them had seen coming, a beginning that would change both of their lives forever. The cabin felt warmer now, the fire crackling in the hearth and casting dancing shadows across the rough wooden walls. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muting the vast plains into a soft white silence, but inside, the atmosphere was tense with unspoken emotion. Luke remained near the door, his tall frame imposing yet steady, watching her as she took cautious steps further into the room. She clutched her bundle tightly, almost as if it were a shield against the unfamiliar, protective warmth of the cabin. "You'll want to take off that coat," Luke said, his voice steady, almost commanding, but not unkind. "You're shivering." Emma hesitated, her eyes flicking toward him, wary but trusting. Slowly, she unbuttoned her thin coat and hung it on the hook by the door. Luke's gaze followed every movement, not in judgment, but in quiet concern. He saw the fatigue etched into her features, the tension in her shoulders, and the fragility she tried so hard to mask. And for the first time in years, something stirred inside him, a protective instinct, yes, but also a deep fascination, a realization that her presence had altered the quiet rhythm of his life in a way he hadn't anticipated. "You'll need something warmer," he said, stepping to a corner of the cabin and grabbing a thick woolen blanket. He handed it to her carefully, his hands brushing against hers briefly. The contact was electric in its subtlety, and Emma's cheeks warmed at the unexpected closeness. She accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders, the warmth sinking into her shivering body, both physical and emotional. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and uncertain. "You don't have to thank me," Luke replied, his eyes locking with hers. "I told you, you stay here on my terms, and part of that is making sure you're safe and cared for." Her lips pressed together as if she wanted to say more, but the words faltered. She had been alone for so long that trust came slowly, hesitantly. But Luke's unwavering presence, his quiet steadiness, made her feel a safety she hadn't known she could feel again. Slowly, she began to relax, letting the tension in her shoulders ease ever so slightly. Luke moved to stoke the fire, tossing in a few logs to make it burn brighter. The orange glow reflected in their eyes, illuminating the fine lines of concern on his rugged face and the delicate features of hers. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair near the hearth. She obeyed, feeling the comfort of the chair and the heat of the fire. They sat together in silence at first, the only sound the crackle of flames and the wind outside. Luke studied her carefully, noting the way her fingers twisted the blanket, how her eyes flicked to him and then away, and how her posture, though hesitant, carried a quiet strength. I don't even know your name," he said finally, breaking the tension. "Emma," she replied softly, glancing up at him. "Emma," he repeated, letting the name settle in his mouth. "Well, Emma, you're safe here. For now, the cabin is yours as much as mine. You don't have to face the cold, or anything else, alone." Her eyes filled with gratitude, but also something else, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, hope. Luke's presence was solid, dependable, and, strangely, gentle. It was not the kind of gentleness that was weak or indecisive, it was quiet, unwavering, and commanding in its steadiness. And it was this steadiness that drew her closer, that made her heart beat faster despite herself. Why are you helping me?" she asked finally, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't even know me." Luke's expression softened. "Because someone has to, and I don't let people wander into danger if I can help it. You're not just anyone, Emma. You're someone who deserves to be safe." The words hung in the warm, fire-lit air, carrying a weight that neither of them could ignore. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat, the emotions she had kept buried for so long pressing to the surface. She realized that for the first time in years, she could be vulnerable without fear, could lean on someone without shame. Luke reached over and handed her a cup of steaming tea, their fingers brushing again. "Drink," he said quietly. "It'll warm you." As she sipped, she noticed the subtle tension in him, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way his gaze lingered on her, protective but also something more. She felt a stirring in her chest, a mixture of curiosity, nervous excitement, and a connection she couldn't yet name. That night, as the snow continued to fall outside and the fire crackled inside, Emma realized that this cabin, this rugged, silent cowboy, and the warmth he offered, both physical and emotional, were changing her in ways she hadn't expected. And Luke, watching her relax by the fire, felt it too, a pull toward her that was more than concern, more than protection. It was the beginning of something neither of them could yet understand, but both knew was powerful. In that quiet cabin, surrounded by the frozen plains, trust began to grow. Connection began to form, and in the flickering light of the fire, both of them sensed that their lives, once solitary, once guarded, were about to change forever. The snow outside had settled into a thick, silent blanket, muffling the sound of the wind and turning the plains into a world of white stillness. Inside the cabin, however, the warmth of the fire and the quiet closeness between them created a stark contrast, a cocoon of safety, intimacy, and unspoken desire. Luke had been watching Emma since the morning light had filtered through the cabin's small windows. She moved with more confidence now, tending the small chores he had shown her, but there was still a hesitancy in her movements, a trace of fear she couldn't completely hide. He cleared his throat, stepping closer as she stacked firewood by the hearth. "You've done well today," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight she hadn't expected. Emma looked up at him, cheeks flushed from exertion, or perhaps from the intensity of his gaze. I didn't want to cause trouble," she said softly. I wanted to help." Luke shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "You're not causing trouble, you're learning, and I'm glad for it. You've got grit, Emma. More than you realize." Her heart skipped a beat at the rare praise, something so genuine and unhurried that it cut through the walls she had built around herself. She had always relied on her own strength, on careful planning, on hiding her vulnerability, but Luke didn't just see her, he noticed the parts of her that she had tried so hard to conceal. And it wasn't judgment she felt from him, it was acceptance, respect, and a kind of protective devotion that made her breath catch. As the evening deepened and the firelight cast long, flickering shadows, Luke moved to sit beside her. He didn't reach for her, didn't force closeness, instead, he simply let his presence settle near hers, steady and unthreatening. Emma found herself watching him, studying the lines of his face, the rugged hands that had tamed this land, the quiet strength that radiated from his posture. And for the first time, she realized she didn't feel afraid, not of him, not of this connection, not even of what she was beginning to feel herself. "You don't have to face the world alone anymore," Luke said quietly, breaking the silence. His eyes were fixed on her, steady, intense, filled with a promise he didn't yet say aloud. "Not while I'm here." Emma's lips parted, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. The words she had buried, words of loneliness, fear, and longing, rose to the surface. I've been so careful," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted anyone to see all of me. But with you, I feel like I can." Luke reached out, hesitating for only a heartbeat before placing his hand gently over hers. The warmth of his touch, firm yet tender, sent a shiver through her. "Then you won't have to," he said softly. "I want you to trust me, to trust yourself, and if you let me, I'll stand beside you. Always." The words hung in the cabin like a promise, filling the air with a tension both thrilling and tender. Emma's gaze fell to their hands, intertwined above the blanket she wore, and for the first time, she let herself imagine a life beyond fear, a life where she wasn't alone, where her heart could open, and where someone could care without condition. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. I do, Luke replied. His hand tightened slightly over hers, a grounding, protective pressure. I'm not just offering shelter, Emma. I'm offering you something I've never given before, someone to rely on. Someone who sees you. Emma swallowed hard, tears threatening her eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief and longing finally acknowledged. She had spent so long hiding, surviving, protecting herself from disappointment and heartbreak. But here, in this cabin, with this man whose presence had become both shield and anchor, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Luke stood, drawing her gently to her feet. He moved close, his tall frame towering yet careful, as if every movement was a silent promise. You don't have to be afraid of me, he whispered. You don't have to hide. Not anymore, not ever. Emma looked up, eyes meeting his, and something shifted. The fear, the hesitation, the self-imposed walls, all of it melted in the warmth of his gaze. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned into him, letting the quiet intimacy and unspoken trust between them form the bond that had been growing since the moment she stepped into his cabin. Luke wrapped his arms around her, firm and protective, and for the first time, he allowed himself to admit the truth he had long denied. He cared for her. More than he had ever expected, more than he had thought possible. And Emma, finally safe and seen, felt the weight of her past lift as she let herself be claimed, not in fear, but in trust and love. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and unrelenting, but inside the cabin, warmth and light flourished. Two lives, once solitary and guarded, had intertwined in a way that neither could have imagined. And as they stood together, side by side, the world beyond the cabin ceased to matter. Luke had chosen her, and in that choice, Emma found everything she had been aching for: safety, trust, and the first stirrings of love that promised forever.